Hi, my name is Jessie and this is Adam, and we're presenting a panel on the wacky world of Japanese bread. Why are we doing this, Adam?
Well, I lived in Japan for a year. That was actually now 10 years ago. But about 6 months into that adventure, I was thinking like, hey, it's been a while since I had a sandwich. And so I attempted to find what we'd think of being normal wheat bread. Sliced whole wheat bread, and realized that I could not find it. And went to the extent of walking halfway across a medium-sized city to try to find an actual bakery at which I could get something that kind of resembled what I thought of as being typical bread. And that was a slippery slope into also then making my own bread. And documenting every single bread-like object that I purchased and consumed, leading to a library of bread photos from this trip. And at some point I was like, hey, maybe it's something that not everyone knows, that Japan has a different relationship with bread than does America. And that, maybe I should share this aspect of culture with others.
All right, so here's our knowledge of Japanese bread to the world. So, why bread? Why should we care about bread? Well, one, it's delicious. Two, it is found in many anime, and in fact, some anime are even about bread.
One, at least.
It
counts.
And
okay, yes.
Three, Japan has done some very wacky stuff with bread. And I want to emphasize here that wacky doesn't necessarily mean bad. But the flavors, presentation, and uses of bread may seem really unusual to Westerners, if you're not familiar with Japanese culture. So.
And also, apologies if you have a gluten sensitivity, because...
this panel might not be for you.
Yes, yeah.
So, part one, bread basics.
What ingredients... What two ingredients, actually, must actually be included in order for something to count as bread, basically? So you have to at least have flour and water, and anything else is optional. And why you might think, okay, well, what about yeast? And yeah, so technically you can have bread that doesn't have yeast and doesn't rise, is unleavened. You still kind of call it bread. If you have yeast, typically are going to have some kind of step in there that involves some kind of rising. So bread's been pretty much a staple across history, and there's documentation for going back at least 10,000 years, such as in this example image here in the inset, which is from Egypt and is actually from a carving. So bread's humans have had a thing for bread for a while now.
All right, and I also want to mention, so if bread always requires flour and water, that means sometimes you come across things that are called bread, but they're actually not bread. So if you've been doing a lot of baking during your quarantine times, you might have come across cloud bread recipes or videos about cloud bread. Cloud bread does not contain flour or water, so it actually isn't bread. And I've heard it actually tastes a lot like eggs. There's a lot of eggs in it.
Yeah, because it has mostly eggs.
So just be careful. Just because it's called bread doesn't mean it is bread.
Also, quick breads are not bread, they're cake.
So the basic bread recipe is you would mix all your ingredients together, you would knead them together, you would let it rise. You punch it down so you kind of let out the air, then you let it rise again, shape it into your loaf, let it rise one more time, and then you bake.
The punching it down is you're letting the air out, because, yeah.
I said that.
Okay, sorry, I missed that.
Different recipes might have variations on this, variations on the time, how many rises you allow it. This is just sort of like your stereotypical bread. And it's the differences in both the ingredients and the preparation that differentiates bread from cake. because you can have cakes that have very similar recipes to bread, but they'll be prepared in different ways. Part 3, the history of bread in Japan.
Part 2.
Sorry,
Part 2.
You're right.
Yeah.
Part 2. Part 2,
Getting
history of bread in Japan. Rice became the primary staple about 2,400 years ago in Japan, which is why some of the words for rice and meal are actually the same. So gohan and meshi can be used interchangeably to refer to specifically rice or to food in general, or meals in general. Soybean products are considered a secondary staple. A lot of Japanese traditional foods emphasize simple processing and the retention of the natural flavor and texture. Buddhist dietary guidelines, because they prohibit meat, that also led to a lack of popularity in dairy products in Japanese foods. And
also, there's just not a whole lot of land suitable for
intensive
dairy
meat production,
yeah.
right? And before 1400, most of the influence on Japanese food came from China and Korea being the nearest neighbors. All right, so time for another pop quiz. What is the Japanese word for bread? The answer for a Japanese word for bread is pan.
Yes. Okay. So why? Why is pan? I mean, it's also you'll notice that this is also written in katakana, which indicates that it's not a native Japanese word. And so, actually, bread was introduced to Japan from Portugal, and it was sometime after 1543, which is when trading actually started, and so actually pan came from Portuguese.
All right, so as we mentioned, in 1543, the Japanese began trading with Portugal. Desserts and sweet snacks from Portugal at that time were popular. Bread was introduced, but it wasn't really super popular in Japan. And then in the 1600s, from 1639 to 1854, you had a period of isolationism, so a lot of trading was cut off. And that's where you get the development of traditional rice-based Japanese cuisine. It really solidified and refined what is Japanese food.
And people started making things like cookbooks and actually creating sort of the things that come along with sort of developing a solid food culture.
Yeah. In 1842, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Adam. Help me out.
Egawa Hidetatsu Tarozaemon.
He is considered the forefather of bread, and he recreated hardtack, which was called kanpan bread, for military use. And then our next milestone is in 1868 with the Meiji Restoration. Japan began trading once again with other countries. Western technology and cuisine was reintroduced. Bread was still eaten widely as part of military rations, and it, at this point, finally started taking off for civilian consumption as well. And this was also aided in the 1918 rice riots, which led to bread being a common part of breakfast because it was easier and cheaper to acquire than rice at that point.
And so after World War II, there was a period where Japan was occupied by the U.S. military, and as part of that, that was mostly for reconstruction efforts, and as part of that aid, there was a lot of flour that was actually provided from the U.S., and so this ended up resulting in bread actually being served in schools, and so that led to bread becoming more widespread across the country.
They were eating it whether they wanted to or not.
Yeah, because it was available, and so after the period of recovery, this led to a time of very rapid economic growth. It was called the economic miracle, and as part of that, there was people were looking sort of outward in the world because they had money to do things like travel and such again, and so that led to a popularity of foreign cuisine and things like chefs from Japan going and training in France and such. And around that time also was the founding of many of the current companies that are big bakeries and such as Yamazaki and Pasco, that are still around.
Yeah. And you do still see a lot of French influence in bread today in Japan. French bread is considered kind of like the best kind of bread, or the sort of quintessential bread.
Yeah. And until relatively recently, most bread was consumed predominantly for breakfast. And you'll see this in anime also, actually, where the typical sort of person having to rush out of the house to go to school is going to have toast. But according to some statistics I was able to find, overall, this table here is actually about breakfast in particular, that in the 80s, there was most people would be sort of eating 3/4 something rice-based, or actually rice, and a little less than 1/4 would have bread, and that is closer to being 50-50 in the last, more recently. And so bread-based sort of snack foods are actually pretty affordable, and so those have become basically ubiquitous. And now more households are actually spending more money on bread than rice. And another thing just to mention is that the sort of how the market for rice in Japan is a little different from here also, because Japan doesn't export rice at all, and they also don't import rice. So this is the price is generally pretty stable, but if there are some times where there might be actually some shortages, they basically can only produce enough for domestic consumption. So now bakeries are basically everywhere, and you can find some small shops and stuff all over the place. And of course, there are these major commercial companies like Yamazaki, and as I mentioned, you can buy products in supermarkets and convenience stores and basically everywhere. And I don't know if you want to talk about the weird.
So modern trends
stuff.
now, you're starting to see premium, ultra soft white bread, so like soft as we can go, as white as we can go. Creative presentation is a common trend that's been strong for a long time. So like the picture here of the cat bus bread. And also, much more recently, finally there's been a movement towards healthier breads.
Yeah,
in
so
Japan.
even in 2010, like I said, I could hardly find wheat bread. Even other normal bread, which we'll talk about in a bit, had things that was made with stuff like margarine. It was not what I would consider healthy, and that was sort of unfortunate, I thought. But so that's trending in a positive direction.
All right, so another pop quiz. What is this thing in the photograph? The answer is, it's a bread machine, or as Adam would call it, a wonderful bread baking robot.
So it's actually Panasonic, or formerly known as the Matsushita Electrical Company, made the first bread machine in 1986. There are actually some pretty good recollections that I've found online of that the team that actually created the first bread machine. There was sort of a small kind of essay thing about that. And this was originally marketed for the Japanese market, and actually the same machine was then a little later sold in the U.S. and was overall pretty successful, and of course then led to more modern iterations of this. And you'll notice that this one looks a little bit different from the previous picture, because they started out with these sort of like vertical loaves where there actually were round or mostly round, whereas now the bread machines have more of a typical, what we consider to be a normal loaf, which is more wide than tall. And there was actually a different kind of machine in 2010. It actually makes something like bread based entirely on rice, and that was sort of like, okay, well, how do we actually, we want to sell more rice still. How do we maybe we can make rice or bread out of rice, and that was, and also there are now machines that do multiple things, including. More like sort of like an Instapot where you make bread, you can cook rice, you can steam other things. Sort of like if you have a really tiny kitchen, you only need one thing to do all this stuff.
And now a word from our sponsors. I'm just kidding.
And
None of this is sponsored.
Yeah.
But these are some commercials that we found about bread products or bread-related items that we thought were amusing or just interesting. So they're going to be scattered throughout this presentation.
今日は象印のパン食べる明日のことはわからない朝から象印のパン食べる夜のことはわからないパンパンパンパンパンパンパンパンパン今日は象印のパン食べる
自分で焼くパンは美味しい象印のホームベーカリー象印
Part 3.
So now we're going to get into what specifically about all of the crazy things that Japan has done with bread. This is probably what you find more interesting anyway.
Starting off with Kogepan. Tell us about Kogepan, Adam.
Why don't you?
All right. Fine. Kogepan was created or developed after World War II as a common school food. So all that flour that America was sending to Japan was being made into Kogepan. It's basically a sweet hot dog bun. It's very simple, very basic. It's still widespread today. You can buy it almost anywhere, including at school. It's often sold with fillings in it. So you can see in the picture here, there's definitely a matcha-filled bun there. And
cream something or other.
Chocolate, yeah.
There's a little more structure to these than a hot dog roll, where you can break a hot dog bun in half pretty easily, but these are a little bit more stiff, I guess. But
and so one of the common fillings you'll find in Kogepan is yakisoba. So you get the yakisoba pan, which is just Kogepan with a bunch of yakisoba plopped in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And Kogepan also led to the development of agepan,
which is basically sort of like a donut. But it is.
It's a Kogepan that's been turned into
fried.
a donut.
Yeah, you fry it and you coat it in sugar. It's kind of a donut.
Also served at schools, it was developed to increase the caloric intake of children. So it's designed to have a lot of calories.
Which makes sense in the post-war period.
Yes. So it's always fried and covered with sugar, and sometimes other powders like soybean powder will be coated on it as well. Next up is shokupan.
Which, literally means food, bread, or, shoku, that's the kanji for eating. And
it's the bread you eat.
Yeah, it's the bread you eat. Because it's basically like the staple bread. But some people have referred to this as milk bread, but I'm probably more referring to the color, because it's very white on the inside. And while most people actually cut the crusts off, the crust is much softer than what we normally think of as
bread crust.
in like normal sandwich bread. And the one thing that's really super obvious when you go into a supermarket and actually look at the bread section is that the slices are really, really thick. And this is like, so a typical size, like the length of a bread package only has 6 slices, because these are enormous.
Usually at least 1 centimeter thick, depending on the region of Japan, you can find slices up to 3 centimeters thick for a single slice of bread.
And if the really thick stuff, you try to make a sandwich with that, and you're actually using 2 slices, you're like actually trying to fit it in your mouth.
Well, it's very soft though, so you can just like...
Yeah, but it's still not ideal for that purpose.
And it contains udane, which helps gives it that really soft texture too, which is basically a semi-cooked or pre-cooked flour water paste, which is mixed in there.
You're basically, I think part of it is like caramelizing some of the sugar up front. Yeah.
And Shokupan's also the leader of that premium bread trend that I mentioned earlier. So in the picture here we have Yamazaki Gold Soft Premium Bread, and it can get a little nutty when you go down the premium bread rabbit hole. This particular bread, you can only reserve it online, so you have to order it in advance, and it's only produced once a month. With like, you know, the best eggs, and the best milk, and the best flour, and it comes in this fancy box that you have to go pick it up in. It gets a little crazy.
I would probably say that it probably doesn't taste much different from the rest of the Yamazaki product line, but that's just me.
We don't know. We haven't tried it.
Haven't tried
Maybe
it.
It's worth the effort.
Yeah, I don't know.
Don't know. Shokupan is kind of, as we mentioned, is usually eaten as toast or in sandwiches. So in the picture here, we have some toast, and we also have the ever famous katsu sando, which is a pork cutlet sandwich. For some reason, if you Google, you know, like Japanese breads or, you know, breads found only in Japan, people list the katsu sando as a bread. It's not a special type of bread. It's a type of sandwich
That obviously uses
that
bread.
uses shokupan. I think it's a little strange to include it as if it was a style of bread in and of itself, but
Yeah.
whatever. Another recent use of shokupan that we've seen crop up, which I have not had the pleasure of eating yet, but I'm hoping soon, someday, that I'll have a chance to try this, is Shibuya honey toast, which is basically using shokupan to create a bread bowl that you then fill with a parfait. I highly recommend you search for images of Shibuya honey toast online. They look amazing. And now a word from our sponsors.
おはよう朝はパンパンパパン朝はパン朝から元気ね本仕込み食べると元気が出るのよ朝はパン食べる前から元気じゃんいただきますもっちり朝はパンもう一枚もう一枚フジパン本仕込み
余計なものは入れない。
できたよ
パスコの長熟。
入った
So, why is Melon Pan called Melon Pan? Assuming you've seen Melon Pan show up in anime before, I'm sure. But
Well, if you haven't, here's a
it's-
photograph.
Yeah, here's a picture. So, why is that called that? So, it's not because it tastes like melon, it's because it sort of broadly resembles some kind of melon. And so it's a more modern innovation that people have made Melon Pan taste like melon. And actually, Melon Pan consists of 2 components. There's actually 2 different things going on there that are combined. So the base is actually bread, and then you coat it over the top with a different dough. It's actually basically cookie dough. And so now it comes in a whole bunch of different flavors, and it's usually the top layer that's flavored. And so now you can actually get Melon Pan that tastes like melon. And there's a lot of different varieties of this. These are all things that I found. So these are my pictures from my own adventures. And of course, green tea, mango. This The French bread one is interesting. It's literally just like baguette bread, but with a sort of slightly different dough on top of it, and that one was very plain tasting, as you might expect.
Adam, would you say it's safe to say that no matter what kind of bread you can find in Japan, there's going to be a green tea version of it somewhere?
It's pretty likely, yes. Yeah. But there are many variations on all of these things, and matcha or green tea just happens to be one of the more popular.
And of course, the ever popular Melon Pan turtle.
Because if you can make something look like a cute animal, then
why not?
You're going to probably do that.
And now a commercial about Melon Pan. And I want to take this opportunity to mention a YouTube channel called Cooking with Dog. It's fantastic. They have an episode on how to make your very own melon pan, so go check it out. There's nothing like watching a cooking show hosted by a dog whose native language is Japanese, but who was taught English by someone who has a very heavy French accent.
Hi, I'm Francis, the host of this show, Cooking with the Dog.
Next up, we are going to be discussing filled breads or stuffed bread. They often look like pastries. Sometimes they taste like pastries, but they are bread.
The dough is definitely bread.
It's bread dough. There's endless variety in what you can put inside of bread. There's many flavors and fillings that you can find in Japan that would never occur to an American to put this inside of bread. But it works, and you'll find them in Japan. Two basic types are kashi pan, which is a sweet filling, or sozai pan, which is just a stuffed bread with a more savory filling. So on this slide, you can see some examples. So we have pea paste filled bread, pumpkin filled bread, soybean paste filled bread. If it can go in a bread, you're going to find it somewhere.
Yeah, so maybe you've seen this guy before. Who is this guy? So this is Anpanman. So that's we'll talk more about Anpanman in a bit. But Anpanman is a superhero whose head is made of anpan.
Adam, quick, say anpan 5 times fast.
Anpanman?
Yeah.
Anpanman, Anpanman.
It's too good. You practiced that, didn't you? So what is anpan, Adam?
Anpan is basically a bread filled with an, which is sweetened red bean paste, and that's probably it's better than what you might think with bean paste. It's actually rather sweet. There's a couple of different variations on. You have tsubuan, which where the beans aren't really completely, like, they're not blended, so they have little solid bean pieces in there. Still, they're steamed, so, they're soft. Versus koshian, where it's a smooth paste.
It's kind of like the difference between chunky peanut butter and creamy peanut
exactly.
butter.
Yeah, so part of the rising the yeast that they might use to rise the dough can be the same yeast that you might use for ferment sake, which actually gives you a little bit of a different flavor. But it's a classic example of something that's really made to cater to Japanese tastes. And just as a side note, April 4th is apparently National Anpan Day.
So on April 4th, make sure you go out and enjoy yourself a lovely anpan.
And so this was something that was originally created by Yasube Kimura, apparently in 1875. And he had owned a bakery that was founded in 1869, actually. So we had been running the bakery for a few years, and before he had created anpan. And it was inspired by steamed buns that are filled with something else, nikuman, so steamed buns that are filled with meat. And so he was probably thinking like, hey, well, why don't we put something else in there and actually make something that's closer to being a confection. And actually, so the bakery was in Ginza, and this actually still exists. Well, that's in Tokyo. And so yeah, it still exists, and you can still go there.
The important thing about Anpan was it kind of led to the realization that you could put anything in bread, and maybe some of it will taste good.
Sometimes it's harder to do for some things than other things, but Yeah.
And it also kind of helps cement bread's place as more of a dessert or a snack rather than part of a full meal. You can find bread in Japan that is used as part of a meal, but it's still widely considered more of a snack type thing.
Yeah, you find more things like anpan than you do dinner rolls.
Yeah.
And I've tried to make this myself before with varying amounts of success. This was a particular experiment where it did not work so well, and you see that the on is kind of like coming up through the dough because I had a hard time actually keeping it in the center, and it's not as easy as it looks, but I was also trying to make it as healthy as possible, which also makes it also much harder.
It was a mess. All
Still
right.
tastes fine.
Next up in our parade of stuffed breads is Kogepan, which looks like a pastry because it was inspired by a pastry, but it is actually bread. Once again, the dough is a bread dough. It usually has this sort of like paw shape because they cut vents in it to help vent the air. I don't know.
Well, you get
something
some
bread baking.
moisture.
Yeah.
Because you have a pretty liquidy filling. So yeah.
Some creative people can use that to make the bread into like really cute shapes, like the hedgehog picture that's here. So Kogepan also actually has a really long history. It was invented in 1904 by Aizo Soma. As I mentioned, it was inspired by French cream puffs. He was also the owner of a bakery called Nakamuraya Bakery, which also still exists, although it goes by the name of Bonan now. Incidentally, a little bit of history trivia, Soma also actually helped introduce curry to Japan.
For those of you who don't know, curry is pretty popular in Japan.
Yes. A Indian freedom fighter by the name of Rash Bahari Bose was fleeing from the Indian government, went to Japan, was taken in by the Soma family, ended up marrying the Soma daughter, and then later on in his life ended up opening a Indian curry restaurant above the bakery.
パンポケポケモンポケモンパン毎日パクパクほっぺがパパンポケモンパンポケパンポケモンポケモンパン元気がパン盛りパワーがパパンポケモンパンポケモン猫キャラシール続々登場かわいいポケモンサラダボールセットプレゼント第一パン
So you've probably seen this before in Lucky Star, but so these are the choco coronet, and so obviously that's a French coronet is a French word, but and you can find them filled with more than just chocolate. Chocolate is sort of the classic filling, but it's basically a cone-shaped bread with filled with something where one end is open.
All right, and then you have the curry bread or Kogepan, which is also a stuffed bread. It's filled with curry and also fried. They're almost always fried. I have not seen a unfried Kogepan myself.
I don't think I have either. This is an example of something that would be more savory. It's actually bread stuffed with basically a seaweed salad. And I think it's good. Maybe it's not for everyone, but Also, another example of that sort of thing would be yakisoba pan, but not with the yakisoba on the bread, having the yakisoba in the bread.
Okay. So more of a bun rather than just a Kogepan filled with yakisoba. Here's another commercial.
天然酵母を使うとパンを作る時間は約5倍それでも届けたい美味しさがありますスローブレッドシリーズフランソワ
So by the way, with the Francois commercials, if you've been thinking to yourself, wow, they almost look like they were animated by people from Studio Ghibli, you would be correct. Actually, several of the people who work on these commercials are members of the Studio Ghibli production company. Next we have steamed breads. Once again, they don't necessarily look like bread, but it is bread. Nikuman is a steamed bun, usually with a meat filling, but you can find all sorts of varieties of fillings. They are based on Chinese baozi. And some of the flavors that you might run into besides the traditional just like pork or beef filling would be curry, pizza man, lasagna man, squid ink, chocolate, cream, chestnut, or the sweet red bean paste. Or one company that apparently produced a crunchy cheese sausage donut man. Whatever that means.
Yeah, and so if it's filled with something else that doesn't meat, then it's really not nikuman. That's why you have that, something else man.
Yeah, they take off the word, the part that says niku, but they still put man on the end of it.
Also, that's why the Anpanman is kind of a play on words.
You also might hear of mushi pan, which despite having pan in the name, are actually not breads. They're steamed cakes.
It's cake.
Yeah. If you look at the ingredients and the way it's prepared, it really is more of a cake that's been steamed rather than a bread.
Yeah.
So on this slide, we just have some examples of the different man you can find. So there's a pizza man. There is a sesame seed, which is the black one. And then over on the side, we have the Nikuman, which is a...
Mikuman. Mikuman. Yes.
Mikuman, which is a Nikuman that has been shaped to look like Sakura Hatsune Miku.
There's, in terms of commercial products, Yamazaki Lunchpaks are something you can find in convenience stores and train stations as like an on-the-go kind of bread product. And these are it's like a sandwich, but it's crimped on the edges so the filling is sealed inside. And they come in all sorts of interesting varieties, such as whipped cream and banana, and meat sauce, cabbage, menchi katsu, matcha chocolate and matcha cream, and yakisoba and pizza and cheese. Just the examples that are on this slide.
And speaking of the Yamazaki Lunchpak, here is a commercial about those.
Lunchpak!
マイスタイルそれは携帯するランチ山崎ランチパック
And so, clearly these are being marketed toward a sort of active, on-the-go, I don't have time to have a real lunch sort of crowd where maybe traditionally those sort of people would eat onigiri instead, but Yamazaki's trying to get them to buy these instead.
All right, true or false? Vending machines specifically for bread exist in Japan. Care to tell us the answer, Adam?
Well, if it's a vending machine exists for anything, it probably, vending machines exist for basically everything. So actually, this is for bread in a can. And you might think, oh, wow, that's crazy. But actually, bread in a can is also a New England thing. So that the B&M, who else is more well known for making baked beans, also sells a bread in a can, which you can find in some supermarkets in New England.
You too can have the bread in a can experience right at home.
And so this is just an example of, It's bread in a can in a vending machine.
Next up, we're going to talk about donuts.
And this is Jessie's thing.
Yes. Some people would argue that donuts are not bread because they're fried rather than baked. I would argue that if they contain yeast, they are bread.
And
so I'm going to talk about them.
basically a sweeter, kind of like a sweeter bagel, and that's then fried.
So it's bread.
Yeah.
They contain water and flour, they're bread. Japanese chains use flavors and presentation that appeal to Japanese tastes, so you'll see green tea icing or even having the actual dough flavored with green tea. Instead of like a jelly-filled donut, you might see an unfilled donut, sesame seeds, so all sorts of varieties of flavors that just you wouldn't ever see here in America. So it's pretty interesting. Pop quiz, what is the most popular donut chain in Japan? The answer is Mr. Donut, or as they call it, Misto.
Misto, yeah.
Is the most popular donut chain in Japan. Bonus trivia, Mr. Donut stores were once common here in America, but they were purchased by Dunkin' Donuts and turned into Dunkin' Donuts locations.
And actually, Mr. Donut is owned by Dunkin' Donuts in Japan, but all the branding that they use is Mr. Donut and not Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah. And as I mentioned before, presentations usually appeal to Japanese tastes, which includes really super cute donuts, like these cute animal donuts. So adorable. Now into the commercial.
プリキュアパンおいしいパパンパン楽しいパパンパンみんな大好きプリキュアパン貼って剥がせるプラペタシール付きスイートプリキュアパンお祝い記念日にはキャラデコ
Now we're back from the commercial. So the next couple of slides are just some other strange bread combinations that Adam has come across.
I took a lot of pictures of bread. And so these are just some examples. And so this, obviously, a lot of people think everything's better with bacon. Well, put bacon on bread. You know, maybe that also applies.
Why not?
French bread that's chocolate flavored. These weren't actually that sweet. It's basically like almost like unsweetened chocolate powder in a French bread, which is kind of odd. Swirled breads, these are pretty common, but this is green tea and mixed in there. You can tell that this is tsubuan because you can see the little bean bits.
And then this isn't something that Adam and I have had the opportunity to try ourselves, but I came across it in my research. So Mentaiko bread, which is fish egg bread, it's basically a French baguette with fish roe and on top of it, which is then toasted. Which definitely would not be to my taste because I don't like fish, but some people probably enjoy it.
Yeah, if you put it on or in bread, it's fair game. This was a creative thing I saw because I was in Japan during the World Cup in 2000, the time of the World Cup in 2010, and there was a lot of advertising and stuff, and that also came up in a supermarket that had soccer related shapes that they made bread into.
And then souffle pancakes are in here because I just really like them. They're not bread. I'm sorry. These don't count, but they're in here anyways because they're amazing, and you should definitely try them if you ever have a chance to go to Japan.
みんないいもの持ってきたわよこれでみんな優勝ゲットだぜ大好評のポケモンパンに楽しい仲間が増え人気のデコキャラシールも続々登場中今ならデコキャラシールホルダーが8万名様に当たるよ第1問食べときゃよかったにゃ
And now on to part 4, bread in anime. This is going to be our final segment for this panel.
So we talked about Anpanman before, right?
Well, Anpanman was originally a picture book. The anime has been airing since 1988. It's now up to over 1,000 episodes. It's very popular. You will see this character everywhere if you look for him.
Yeah, merchandise in
Yeah,
like lunchbox, the kids' lunchboxes, things like that.
Yeah, he's like Thomas the Tank Engine or something like that is here in America. You'll just
I
find the
was sort of
toys,
thinking
everything.
that his face does kind of look like the Thomas the Tank Engine face. But
And as we mentioned before, he is a superhero with a head made of Anpan. Which I hear sometimes gets consumed.
I think that actually sometimes he gets eaten and then they have to bake him a new head. I forgot to just check that. I have a vague recollection of that being the case. You might want to double check me on that one.
So next we're going to just play a quick clip of the opening from Anpanman.
恐れないでみんなのために愛と勇気だけが友達さ
The next anime we're going to discuss is Kogepan, which literally just means burnt bread. The anime has 10 4-minute shorts, so a very quick watch if you're interested in it. There's also 3 children's books. And it's the daily life of a burnt piece of bread. And he's grumpy and kind of sits around all day and complains about being burnt, and that's the show. Adam could talk about this one because he actually watched it.
Sort of watched it. But it's another series of shorts with a few girls that kind of bond based on how much they like bread. And there's not a whole lot more to it than that, but
there's 13 episodes.
Yeah.
They're only 3 minutes each.
It doesn't take you very long to watch it.
Yep, it's cute girls doing cute things, this time with bread.
With bread.
No discussion about bread anime would be complete without talking about Yakitate Japan. The manga had 26 volumes. The anime had 69 episodes, so it will keep you going for a while. And it is the story of one boy's quest to invent the perfect Japan, a bread that both represents and is beloved by the people of Japan. And it's kind of like Food Wars, except it's all bread. Every episode is just bread.
And so many puns.
Yes.
So many puns.
And I've heard, I haven't watched Food Wars, but I've heard that, people kind of comment about the reactions that the characters have to eating really good food. That definitely is taken way to the extreme in Yakitate Japan, which does predate Food Wars, by the way. The reactions are really outrageous, culminating, if I remember correctly, in one character literally actually dying after eating a piece of really good bread. He comes back to life, though. It's fine. It's spoilers.
But yeah, it's an absurd show, and it's also kind of amazing, but it is fundamentally about bread. Well, it's about a guy and his relationship with bread, but
We will quickly allow the anime to introduce itself.
イギリスパン、ドイツパン、フランスパンはあれど、日本のパン、ジャパンはない。ならば、これから作るしかない。この物語は熱き血潮が宿る太陽の手を持つ少年東一馬が世界に誇れる日本人の日本人による日本人のためのパン、ジャパンを作っていく一大叙情詩である。
Alright, our final pop quiz. In episode 27 of Yakitate Japan, there is a demonstration of how to make bread using a kitchen appliance that is common in Japan. What was that appliance?
it's not a bread machine.
The answer is they made bread using a rice cooker. Some steamed bread. Alright, and that is the end of our show. Please enjoy your bread adventures if you ever have a chance to visit Japan. Keep an eye out
There
for
are many
the
adventures to be had.
keep an eye out for some of the classic and more unusual breads that we've discussed here today.